I'd sooner lose everything I own than wed that woman Hargrove. Everything. The house, the land, the very shirt off my back. Do you understand me? The Duke of Vanbrook flung his gloves onto the hall table and glared at his butler, as though the man had personally arranged the disaster of the morning. Hargrove, who had served 3 generations of Vanbrooks and was not easily glared into agreement, merely inclined his head and said, "Perfectly, Your Grace," in the tone of a man who has heard a great many perfect certainties in his 40 years and outlived most of them. The woman in question was Miss Arabella Frost, and the Duke of Vanbrook, Tarquin, 7th of that name, and by common agreement the most impossible man in the county, had spent the better part of a fortnight being contradicted, corrected, and comprehensively bested by her. And he could not remember when he had last been so thoroughly aggravated or, though he would have died before admitting it, so thoroughly alive. It begun over a hedge. Or rather, over the boundary the hedge was meant to mark, which ran between the Vanbrook estate and the small, tidy, mortgaged property of the late Mr. Frost, whose only child had inherited it along with his stubbornness and his servior's eye. The Duke's steward had moved the hedge a full 6 yards in the Vanbrook direction some years back, on the reasonable grounds that no one had ever objected. Miss Frost had objected. Miss Frost had arrived at the great front door of Vanbrook Hall with her late father's estate map, a measuring chain, and an entirely infuriating calm, and she had proceeded, on the Duke's own gravel, to prove him a trespasser on his own ground. 6 yards, Your Grace, she had said, unrolling the map across the bonnet of nothing, holding it up in the wind with both hands and her chin. The boundary is the old ditch, not the new hedge. My father surveyed it himself in the year I was born. You may keep the 6 yards if you like. A duke can surely spare 6 yards to a woman who has very little. But you cannot pretend they are yours, because they are not, and I find I dislike a pretense even more than I dislike losing ground. No one spoke to the Duke of Vanbrook that way. No one had, in years. His consequence was such that the whole county arranged itself around his moods like iron filings round a lodestone, flattering him, agreeing with him, laughing at his indifferent jokes. And here was a slight young woman in a plain pelisse with a mended cuff, standing on his gravel with a measuring chain, telling him to his face that he was wrong, and this was the intolerable part, being correct. He had checked the map that night. Twice. She was right about the ditch. He had not, of course, told her so. He had instead invited her to dine, on the transparent pretext of settling the boundary as neighbours, in the private hope of catching her out on some finer point and restoring the natural order of things. It had gone very badly for the natural order of things. Miss Frost had matched him course by course, on the drainage of the low meadow, on the price of wheat, on a line of Latin he had misquoted, and she had, with terrible gentleness, quoted correctly, and she had done it all without malice, without flirtation, without any of the little tricks the county's young ladies used on him, simply as though it had not occurred to her that a duke's opinion was worth more than a right one. And Tarquin, Duke of Vanbrook, had gone up to bed that night in a black and glorious temper, unable to stop thinking about the way she'd said, "I dislike a pretense even more than I dislike losing ground." That had been the beginning. It was now a fortnight on, and matters had not improved. They had quarrelled about the hedge, the ditch, the meadow, the merits of enclosure, the education of women, the character of Hamlet, and at their most recent encounter at the vicarage of all mortifying places, before half the parish, about whether a man of great fortune had any right to an opinion on hardship. She had said he had not. He had said that was an ignorant thing to say. She had said sweetly that she would defer to his greater experience of ignorance. The vicar had spilled his tea. The Duke of Vanbrook had ridden home in a fury that had not yet, 3 hours later, in the least abated. She is the rudest woman in England, he told Hargrove now, pacing the hall. The most obstinate. The most. She does not even want anything from me, Hargrove. Do you comprehend the strangeness of that? Every soul I meet wants something. My favour, my invitation, my name for their daughter. She wants nothing. She corrected my Latin at a vicarage tea and then thanked me for the muffins as though she had not just. She is impossible. I'd sooner lose everything I own than wed that woman. Yes, Your Grace, said Hargrove. You mentioned. Shall I have your horse brought round again? You appear to require another ride. Tarquin stopped pacing. The trouble, and he was honest enough, in the privacy of his own hall, to begin to see the shape of the trouble, was that he had said wed. Hargrove had not raised the subject of marriage. No one had. He had crossed the county from the vicarage in a temper about a boundary dispute and a misquoted line of Latin, and he had walked into his own house and, unprompted, announced that he would sooner lose everything than wed Miss Arabella Frost. The word had come from somewhere. It had come from him. He went very still, there in the hall with his gloves flung down and his blood up. The truth, when he permitted himself to look at it directly, was this: in a fortnight of being contradicted, out-reasoned, and refused every ordinary tribute owed to a duke, he had not been bored for a single hour. He had not been lonely. He understood, suddenly and rather appallingly, that he had been lonely for years, sealed inside his consequence like a man in a very grand glass case, and that he had not felt the loneliness until it lifted. He thought about the low meadow at odd moments because she had opinions about its drainage. He had reread Hamlet. He had ridden past the ditch 3 times in 3 days for no reason he could name. And every one of those rides and every one of those quarrels, he had gone into hoping, beneath the temper, beneath the wounded consequence, that she would be there, chin up, entirely unafraid of him, ready to tell him he was wrong. "Hargrove," said the Duke of Vanbrook slowly, in an altered voice, "Your Grace?" When a man declares, unprompted, that he would sooner lose everything he owns than marry a particular woman, a woman he has thought of every hour for a fortnight, and quarrelled with at every opportunity, and ridden 6 miles out of his way to quarrel with again, what would you say ails him? Hargrove permitted himself the smallest possible smile, no more than a softening at the corners of a very correct mouth. "I should say, Your Grace, that the gentleman was very badly in love, and the last in the county to notice it, if you will forgive the liberty." The Duke of Vanbrook did not have him dismissed. He sat down rather suddenly on the hall bench instead, among the flung gloves, and put his head in his hands, and began, helplessly, ridiculously, to laugh. He wooed her badly, because he had never wooed anyone in his life and had no notion how, and because Miss Arabella Frost was proof against every method a duke might ordinarily employ. He sent flowers. She returned them with a note observing that his gardener had cut them too early and they would not last, but thanking him for the thought. He offered to give up the 6 disputed yards. She wrote back that she did not want the yards, she wanted the boundary drawn honestly, and would he please stop trying to buy his way out of having been wrong. He arranged transparently to be riding along the ditch at the hour she walked it, and when she came upon him she looked at him with those clear, level, unafraid eyes and said, "Your Grace, you have ridden this ditch 4 times this week. Either you mean to build something, or you have run out of things to say to me and cannot think how to stop turning up. Which is it?" And Tarquin, Duke of Vanbrook, who had never in his life been at a loss for a cutting reply, found that he had none. He dismounted. He stood before her on the disputed ground with his hat in his hand, stripped of every advantage his consequence had ever given him, and told her the truth, because she had made it plain over a fortnight that she despised anything else. "The second," he said, "I have run out of things to say and cannot think how to stop turning up. Miss Frost, I have quarrelled with you about a hedge and a ditch and a meadow and the drainage thereof and the character of the Prince of Denmark, and I have lost every quarrel, and I have never in my life been happier to lose anything. You are the rudest, most obstinate, most maddening woman in England. You correct my Latin. You will not flatter me. You do not want a single thing from me, not my favour, not my name, not my consequence. And it has taken me a fortnight and a great deal of undignified riding to understand that the reason I cannot stop turning up at this ditch is that the one thing in the world I now want is the one thing I cannot make you take by being a duke about it. I told my own butler I would sooner lose everything I own than wed you." He drew a breath. "It appears I was lying to him. It appears I would sooner lose everything I own than not." For the first time in a fortnight, Arabella Frost was silent. He watched the colour come up in her face, watched her, for once, be the one to search his eyes for the joke, the trap, the Duke's careless game, and he stood very still and let her look, and let her see that there was none. "You are mocking me," she said at last, but without conviction. "This is some fresh way to win the argument. I have given up winning arguments with you," said Tarquin. "I lack the equipment." "No, Miss Frost, Arabella, I am asking you to marry me badly, on the very ground we have spent a fortnight fighting over, 'cause I cannot imagine a single day of the rest of my life that would not be improved by your telling me over breakfast precisely how I am wrong. I have been alone inside my own consequence for years, and I did not know it until you walked onto my gravel with a measuring chain and refused to be impressed by me. Do not be impressed by me for 50 years. Be exactly as you are. Only be it beside me. Arabella Frost looked down at the ditch, and at the map she was not holding, and at the great impossible man standing bareheaded before her with his heart in his plain and unaccustomed words. And when she looked up, the level clarity in her eyes had gone soft at the edges, and something behind them had begun, very slowly, to shine. You cut your flowers too early, she said unsteadily. You misquote your Latin. You moved a hedge 6 yards onto ground that was not yours and expected no one to object. You are arrogant and spoiled, and you have been agreed with by cowards for so long you had quite forgotten how to be told the truth. She stopped. Her voice cracked, just once. And in a fortnight of telling you the truth, your grace, I have discovered that you listen, which no man of your station has ever done for me in my life, and that when you are wrong, you go home and check the map, and come back the wiser and never once hold it against the one who bested you. That is a rarer thing than fortune. I did not come here to be courted. I came here about a hedge. I am as astonished as you are. Is that a yes, said the Duke of Vanbrook, or is it a preface to a longer refusal? I confess I have lost the habit of telling with you. It is a yes, you impossible man, said Arabella Frost, and laughed, and let him take her hand there on the disputed ground, provided you understand that I shall go on correcting your Latin until the day you die, and that the boundary will be drawn at the ditch. At the ditch, Tarquin agreed, and drew her hand to his lips, and found he was grinning like a boy. Honestly and forever, at the ditch, Hargrove will be insufferable. He guessed it before I did. He had told his butler, on a Monday, that he would sooner lose everything he owned than wed Miss Arabella Frost. He proposed to her on the Friday, on the very ground they had fought over, and she accepted him with a correction and a laugh, and the Duke of Vanbrook, who had spent his whole life being agreed with by cowards, spent the rest of it being cheerfully, gloriously, lovingly contradicted by the one person in England who had never for a moment been afraid of him. The hedge was moved back to the ditch. The Latin was corrected daily. And Hargrove, asked in his old age to account for the great happiness of the 7th Duke, would say only that his Grace had once declared he would sooner lose everything than wed a certain lady, and had, in a manner of speaking, done exactly that, and gained the whole world in the losing.